Okay, so I don't know why we're already getting dropped frames. I'm sure it won't be a problem. I'm honestly not even sure how much redundancy there's going to be in the stream, since I just did a build on, I just did a video on the builds I used for last Uranium, and then surprise, they gave us another one. So there's probably going to be some overlap there, and I haven't combed through the multiple tens of gigs of videos either, so it's possible that I will be a non-procrastinating noodle in the future and actually edit those together. But in any case, I didn't include gameplay videos with the last one, probably won't do it with this one either, but can go over at least what was built and used in the last Uranium event, and a couple of builds before then, I guess. So to start with, I'll go to the exhibition, talk about the one I made for the pumpkin event, for the Halloween contest. They wanted us to build an armored pumpkin, and I got by far the most likes in the community, at least on console exhibition, but didn't get a prize placement, big sad. But there are actually quite a lot of really good other designs out there, so I'm not gonna fault them for that. Let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah, so there wasn't very many that at least ended up staying on the console exhibition. I think there was a total of maybe 6 during the actual event before people deleted them. Mine was well received enough that I'm going to keep it up, and I even had a copycat. This is literally the first time I've ever used any of these fire starter fenders in a build, just because they're such low durability and such they're so space inefficient that I haven't found much use for them regularly. I know when they're the spaced armor meta was a thing, people would use a whole bunch of these as tangles, but yeah, the first time I use them, and I use every single one of those fuckers to make a pumpkin shape. So I don't know if I'd say it's my best art. It's by far the most heavily upvoted. I think the second closest was a remake of the War Pack with a kaiju for 150, but I couldn't even tell you if that was before or after the platform merges. So pretty straightforward. It just needed to look like a pumpkin, it needed to have weapons, and it needed to move. So I made the quote-unquote face where you'd have the light from the candle holes be remedies, gave them a blight because it's the obvious choice for anything flamethrower related, and then I put some decor on it because of course I did. The inside is a bit of a smorgasbord of different parts. You can kind of tell I used the syndicate part, I think, again, literally for the first time as the stem, because I was like, wow, that is literally exactly the shape that every single one of the pumpkins I ever carved had their stem stamped off as. So the rest of it is kind of just a smorgasbord of structural parts, as you can see, just trying to hold the things together as a result of these shapes and how close they are, so they're actually overlapping in multiple spaces. There's not a whole lot of areas where you could connect to one piece without interfering with the next one. So these specifically, which I believe are called the cover your parts, yeah, so these ones specifically were the worst because they have fairly limited connection pips to begin with, and then almost all of these overlap with, or rather because they're off-centered, end up overlapping with pips from the next one. And since this is too wide and we're trying to nest it in each other, it saw it as being not applicable to have space to have structural parts. So that's why there's all these vertical thin strike plates, because those parts are essentially you can't call them a zero width part, but because you have the smallest shape you can have, smallest dimension you can have, and this is 1 by 1, and then have some concavity or convexity as a result of the shape, the thin strike plate is perfect for that. And I've mentioned and showed in quite a lot of my other builds that it will fit in places nothing else will fit, because it has the smallest possible footprint in the game. So as long as something doesn't block off literally the entire pip, if it leaves, as you can see, like the bottom and side, or depending on the direction, the top and side or whatever. But if it doesn't interfere with that or go all the way into the corner, then the thin strike plate can generally fit on it. Unfortunately, we only get 6 of those, but you know, there's other parts that also work likewise, and I mean, it definitely got the job done. So that was probably the most difficult part of this. Obviously, with the center pieces, I could just attach them to the slopes, and then with the the piggy blinders in the center, and then thorns for the end pieces. Those ones had a little bit more. Those. A little bit easier connection points on the bottom there, so that allowed me to attach fairly easily. And then I tried to obviously have the entire top be sort of curved as well. It ended up being very flat just because I couldn't end up making like another like increase to the slope height and then go back down, where like that's how it goes in normal pumpkins. The highest part of the pumpkin is the rim on the top, and then it, you know, descends both towards the center with the stem and on the outside. And I tried doing that, and it didn't end up going super well. The other person who ripped it did try that as well, and that's essentially what I tried at first as well, but I found I didn't really like the effect of it as much, so I kind of just kept it flat on the top. And yeah, like technically usable, by far one of the lowest power score builds I have, because it's, you know, purely art. But I mean, it still does have a hefty amount of durability and obviously damage output for being essentially an art build. As far as other ones that I uploaded on Exhibition, I've been shuffling some around as a result of like build updates and new parts and whatnot. So for other new ones, I don't think I've really thrown any of them up, like the Shotgun Brick or Relentless or the Mech or Chonk are ones that I've talked about before, and I just shuffled into the Exhibition. Currently I haven't actually changed anything with them, although there's stuff I want to change with them in the future. The Earthquake is a newer one, but that's part of a longer conversation, so I'll get back to that. And then as a result, some of the ones that I downloaded or have here are also quote-unquote new, but are just ones that were from Exhibition and vice versa. So would be the easiest way to do it. Probably just talk about the proliferation of basically just 2 builds in my inventory. So I did update the Atlas, both its Big Ram and ML version, with helicons, because I now have helicons, and I had mentioned earlier that was kind of part of the plan the entire time. I have not updated Gaia because that would require making it not accessible to the person who the build is for, although in theory with the Odin you could have a 3rd snowfall on there. And then that's why those are here, even though I mentioned I might end up swapping these out for mech legs, because I'm primarily only, like, I'm not even using these builds actively right now. I don't have another player to do it with. But if I were to, it would likely be mostly PvE content. So when we had the big chase raids, those were like more so what we were using it for, where it definitely had a lot more sense to have like that one tanky build on the front, and then somebody with a lot of mobility and health, but not like at direct risk of taking damage on the back. We haven't had that event for, I think, a bit. I mean, we did technically have a variant of it like sometime in the last 6 months, but you're better off using Jotuns and Akaris because they fucked up the damage resistant bellies. So for the 12-13k bracket, I had the dual narwhal harpy, and I kept that. I didn't really change literally anything about it. I had the I don't even see it now. I had a third one that might have ended up on exhibition instead. And then I had the shark tooth. So since I haven't talked about the shark tooth in a while, just a quick overview again is it's essentially a double harvester Chronos build designed to be able to regenerate its melee capabilities once enemies are killed. And it ended up sitting pretty well within the 12-13k bracket because I don't really have a whole lot of mass or space on it to fit a Apollo or Odin. So we tried that. We only got, like, in the last 2 Uranium sessions, we've only gotten, I think, a total of, like, 4 matches. So we haven't gotten anywhere with it. But essentially, this is the one that I had on the exhibition for a while, running the Doppler, the Aegis, the Tormentor. All of that stuff is very much the same. But I did have issues actually clinging to people nowadays, because despite the multiple nerfs to hovers, they still weren't quite sticking to the front of it as much as I like. So I did make a variant, and we'll probably hold on to it in the meantime, for the Skinner instead of the Tormentor, because I felt like with the perk of them being, 240% increased damage anyway if you can stay attached for 4 seconds, that being able to attach to somebody would be more useful. So I have the Skinner there on the front. That required me to jostle a lot of the internals. You can see the Doppler now just kind of sitting on the back there. And unfortunately, due to the shape of the harvesters and how they're positioned, it is kind of hard to grapple enemies once you're within a certain distance. And especially, hovers are a whole different beast due to their maneuverability and their height floating above ground. Theoretically doable if you hit it at the sweet spot, but not necessarily super easy. On the plus side, the Skinner's difficult to shoot off as a result of it barely even able to attach itself a lot of the time. And like I said, we haven't really played around a whole lot with Clan Wars or anything with it. So I will note that it's something interesting I've actually translated to a couple of other builds is, while beforehand I was running the 6 heavy fenders anyway, and then the logical extension of that, if you want to protect the Bigfoot wheels and not go to Titans, which if you're running a Cheetah engine, to reduce the cooldown on things like an Aegis or the Tormentor or a Cloak, that if you did reshuffle the armor, you could look at putting Partisans around it, and I found that I was overmassed with that. But the Montefortino, which is the 6x4x2 Ravager part with the inlet on it, that actually fits perfectly in the same footprint while only being a single piece and being a lot lighter. So while it's theoretically a lot more risky for people to shoot me directly from the side, since there's only that one part with 110 durability versus a large fender with 110 and a Partisan with 88, not including the multiple resistances, it's a good enough space filler. It's not super obvious unless you literally see this video and then fight it, and getting attacked from the side is kind of antithetical to the build anyway. You want to be generally behind people or directly in front and running away. So yeah, just mostly a shuffling of internals. If I end up having another 12-13k event that allows you to queue solo, then I'll probably play around with it some more, but in the meantime it's just sort of a placeholder build and its variant for if we do end up going into Uranium at all ever as a group again. Then for the 10Ks, I did a lot more experimenting. So as a result of getting the relics from the Halloween event, some of my clanmates were playing around with the idea of running single Devourer, which I'm super hardcore against because it does not feel very it's funny to say it doesn't feel powerful, because I know a lot of conversation on the Discord and Reddit and forums is how it's too OP and it's completely taking over the meta in Clan Wars or PC or something of that ilk. I don't know, because I'm not involved in any of those, but the single one does not do so super great at 9-10k. So this is my variant of a version that was sent to me. It was essentially a complete rebuild of what they had, but as you can tell is running the Echo Cabin as single dev, and then for the other hardware fairly limited just due to the power score restriction of the 9k for regular, and then for 10k for Uranium, which I didn't bother tiering it up for. So this is a 9k variant, and I felt with the current state of the game, the Echo cabin on array wheels is not tanky enough, at least for the sake of, having the single gun, and having it be the gun means you're essentially out of the fight. It's not fast enough, and the single dev with a flywheel and the Echo cabin perk does not deal enough damage to reliably win, 1v1s. So, Destructors are going to mess you up, Arbiters are going to mess you up, Raijins and Yongwangs are their own entire beast right now, but are, just a complete, wipe. The things that it's good at are going to be, in my opinion, I know a lot of people use them really close range as bricks, and I don't really approve of that use, but obviously it works for some people, especially if you're in a 4-stack with Humpback or Sir Mars or something. But in my case, I found that it's a lot more effective at mid-range as a sort of suppressing fire roll, and this build just does not lend itself to being able to hold any of those placements very well, nor being fast enough to boogie out of there. So it's not really a super unique build. I have multiple builds which are essentially the Echo and then running heavy fenders and then armoring around the gun. So this sort of format is nothing new, but I didn't find it very effective. So I will probably just end up deleting this. Not really anything super exciting or unique about it. Did have some issues getting parts wrapping around the Horo when you have it vertically, but sort of limitation that since it's a super awkward shape. And then you can see oppressor, which isn't the only thing attaching to the gun, because I'm not nearly that bad at the game, but I know some people are. Or in Uranium especially, you saw a lot of people running 6 buggy wheels with a Humpback Devourer, and it's great because you just knock out the 3 wheels on one side, and they were just basically they weren't contributing for the rest of the match unless you decide to stay in the area and let them shoot you. So yeah, if I were to continue developing it, I would need to essentially play around with the power score some more, and obviously I don't have a whole lot of options for that. The most obvious change I could make is swapping from the Echo to the Carapace, since it's now a baby Echo, even though they used to be entirely different, since that would maintain the speed. I wouldn't really lose any mass, since I'm not even at the mass limit right now, and then I'd also save some power score to put into more modules, because even with the reduced energy of 1, I still have 3 extra energy with this current build, so that's not really a risk. But yeah, again, I just felt like it wasn't really successful enough, and the other option would be Humpback, and I think that was a more popular option for others. Or sorry, not Humpback, the Jawbreaker, the quote-unquote baby Humpback. But a 15% damage boost doesn't really seem super worth it, and then that's another taller cabin, which means I'd have to change out the armor on the sides and around the gun again, whereas while the Carapace is still a different shape than the Echo, it's actually a lower profile shape. So I can actually look at reducing the height even more by tucking it, continuing to have it behind the cabin, or I can put it directly on the cabin and have even less risk of degunning. So felt there's a few more options there, but I really wasn't satisfied with this sort of setup for the build period, never mind that explicit setup. So what I ended up doing is 3 different variants of my Wraith build. So this was originally a wheeled build running the Kaiju and then the Thyrsus as a anti-aircraft before we got Starfalls, and then ended up developing into a hover because I felt like the ability to keep range and height over people was a little bit more important. Using wheels with a Thyrsus is super awkward due to its hitbox, due to trying to have a scope, have view, not being able to go forward and backward at the same speed if people approach you from a different direction. So this has worked out a lot better for me. I actually used it in a few of the Uranium battles. Unfortunately, it kind of has the exact same issue every other build Uranium Wars has, which is if I myself am not bringing radar, or am not in a group with people who are already bringing radar, my team has no radar. And if my team has no radar, they are going to lose. So a lot of what I do with a lot of these builds as far as the energy economy kind of goes out the window when I know I have to be running sometimes multiple, but at least one radar that's not just, the keen. But in theory, could swap out for things like a flywheel or a cloak or even a jacky on setups like this. But as it is, the current meta for Uranium Wars especially, the hovers don't perform so super well with the Thyrsus. So that's another one where going back to wheels is preferable despite their limitations, and in fact what a couple of the clan members are doing. The use in like PvP especially is quite nice though. And of course you can like swap out the cabin. I just really like the Griffin for that sort of leaning into the stealth capabilities of the Thyrsus, especially when you have to be, nearby other corpses. So I did a couple of variants on that, one of which is for running the Devourer. So in that case I did swap to the Catalina and the Jackie to maximize on damage, save a little bit of power score, lose some energy, tear down the generator as a result. But this I felt was actually performing pretty well. I didn't ever take it into Uranium because again I found that the single Devourer is just not, especially on 85 kph, is just not going to perform well against the current absolute mess of Rygens everywhere. But I did use this in PvP and Next Step quite a bit, so it's actually, I've been working on the machine gun, the Relic trial, and it's been going pretty well since I can actually aim up, use the neutrino, use it at range, and deal with some aircraft, which some ground-based builds, especially something like a wheeled Thyrsus, wouldn't be able to do nearly as well. The other use case I've been doing with the Griffin was actually kind of leaning the opposite direction into kind of similar, but like an indirect fire as a tow build, since that got buffed, and I've been playing around with that a little bit. The most successful use, it's basically been a variant of my cockpit Yongwang build, since just like the Yongwang, the tow plus cockpit is allowed to lean into that damage boost twice, not only once for the Hermes boosting the clarinet tows perk directly, but also again indirectly by giving a damage bonus when the cockpit's boosting is active. So this is also what another one of the climates has found most effective for using with the tow, which is just like an inordinate amount of damage and trying to 1 or 2 shot builds. I kind of like the idea of using a Harpy or a Griffin, the former for blowing up more parts at once and going for like more armor destruction in order to make kills easier for other teammates, or going for the Griffin to again allow for cloaking and repositioning. So that's what this variant is. And then I also had made another one for the person who originally asked about clarinet tow builds, which is why I did this whole smorgasbord of variants, which was using the Hippogriff for its innate radar instead of having to bring one with you, because again, if you don't bring radar, nobody on your team's going to bring radar, and then you tend to have quite a bad time. So it was the 9K variant that they ended up using a variant of this variant in for Uranium. Sorry, not Uranium, for Clan Confrontation. And now that Clan Confrontation is back, they might go back to running it, but at least in the meantime it was Uranium this past week, so not as super relevant. The Hippogriff does of course have less radar than a upgraded Doppler, or even just a non-upgraded Doppler, so I still prefer running the hardware directly. And then you do also have the increased power score as a result of running a legendary cabin. So not super happy with how this performed for the trade-offs beforehand, but at the very least the innate nook of the Hippogriff on its front did make it easier to fit a Jackie, which of course is rather large, as well as the clarinet itself, which is super awkwardly shaped, because the Jackie's 4 high, even running Bigfoots, you're going to need an additional pip of clearance, which means you're either going in front of or behind the cabin or using some interior cavity on the cabin. So that worked. I mean, pretty straightforward as far as the rest of the setup. It took a lot of time, like, squishing everything together, but in any case, it does fit pretty much only because of the Bigfoots being able to actually shoot out the projectile below frame value, or below frame level, because otherwise you're looking at leaving empty frame / having the weapon on the back where it's a lot more exposed, or having it completely above the frame level, which is also, you know, a bit riskier. So that's what, you know, multiple of my variants went for, was below frame level instead, and thus necessitating either Bigfoots or, you know, other taller wheels like Titans or large wheels. But in my case, I found the Bigfoots topical, since I could use them with a cheetah engine to reduce the cooldown on cloak anyway, and you don't really lose that much speed over the fin whale, which again is even more power score and has a perk which doesn't even really apply to the tow, because whenever you fire it, your vehicle decelerates and stops moving anyway. So this was the original version, and then I changed to the Griffin for my personal use, and this was something I played around with in regular PvP a little bit, and then Uranium a bit, but I found that especially in the 4v4 nature of Uranium, you didn't really have a whole lot of leeway for being able to sit on the edge of the map. People would normally come and focus you. The Griffin was kind of nice for that, but of course its perk time has an up time of about 1/3, and then even supplemented with the cloaking, anytime you fire the missile, your vehicle stops moving despite having a lot of power. You don't actually even need 6 Bigfoot wheels for the tonnage. As a result, a lot of them are essentially just redundant for durability's sake, but you end up having a very slow acceleration from stop if you want to try and reposition because somebody's getting near you. It was still doable, again, between the map immunity and you know, name tag immunity entirely, and the cloak for whoever wasn't running a cloak radar, but at the same time it just didn't perform well enough, quite possibly due to the reduced damage, the lack of a cabin perk boosting its, you know, output. Having reduced energy, reduced power score means reduced damage indirectly from the other hardware anyway. It didn't perform well enough, especially in those 4v4 games, because you just had so many people running Raijins or Yongwangs, whatever, you know, meta flavor of choice, and then they'd go and dive, and then of course they'd get fucked up because it's a 4v1, a 3v1, even a 2v1 that they go face first into. They'd die, and even if you're providing, you know, this firing support, even if you're dealing literally thousands of damage in the meantime, they die. Now the 3 or 4 enemies move on to your next rando who's by themselves, and so on and so forth. So you'd be, you know, the last one left against 2, 3, 4 enemy builds, even if you completely cripple 2 of them, which is well outside the bounds of what an average player should need to do, taking out twice as many enemies as they themselves count for. You are just not in a very good situation. So, especially with the ability for people to, of course, then just essentially ignore you, go and cap, or have others hunt you down, do a little bit of both, bleed out the timer, then go for center cap. It didn't have that actual damage output to be competitive. So, this wasn't particularly successful either. And like I said, the Hippogriff, wasn't super enjoying its performance, and now I have it on video, I can get rid of it. But the Griffin variant was very much the same way. On the plus-ish side, scaling this down to the 9K bracket would be a bit more doable, and especially in Uranium with you know, generally coordinated teammates. Having a Griffin being able to give map immunity to your entire team at the start of the match is huge. Even if you don't end up being close enough to the rest of your teammates to use it for the rest of it, just that start can make a huge difference when so many matches are just both teams like running into the center of the map, killing whatever they see first, generally dying because it's an idiotic play, but it has the flexibility for that. You can get rid of that. The last variant I used, which ended up being one that I actually put quite a bit of time in because I was just playing around enjoying the mode, and I needed to get closer in points to my battle buddy for Uranium, was actually running it like the clanmate had priorly suggested alongside the cockpit, because this is getting that double dip on the damage. It's focusing specifically on damage, going for those 1 or 2 shot, at least mobility kills on a lot of builds. Like I said, especially those 6 buggy wheel ones that think that that's enough movement in 10K. But also, the boosters do let you evacuate areas a lot more easily. So whilst this isn't, you know, as high DPS in theory due to not having the like a really low reload, running the dead man cabin, anything like that, it makes up for it for each of those shots hitting extremely hard, and then whenever you do, you can use the boosters to get out of there. And while yes, you aren't taken off of the map, thus it's a lot easier for people to chase you than using a Griffin or a Cloak or a Griffin and Cloak. I did poke around with trying to get the Yeti on here quite a bit, since that would be useful for especially already running the Ruin, but the power score for it didn't end up being super great, mostly because, again, needing to run radar because teammates are too stubborn to actually operate in their best interest. But for the 10K bracket, theoretically possible to run this with a Yeti and then have the Cloak, but it's the sort of thing where you need a boost for the damage bonus, and you're probably going to boost to get away from them faster. So being cloaked prevents you from using a booster without revealing your position. So it's kind of a conflict there, but you could theoretically get away with running them together, and it definitely performed a lot better. Like, my plan was to do matches and then match my buddy's score. I ended up going like net positive by like 30 some more points anyway, even though that wasn't the intention. So it definitely works. And then since we had the upgrade event, I also upgraded this for the rocket turn speed, because it feels like Jay is by far the best co-driver, especially since the perk can actually activate, unlike a lot of the others. But at the same time, Jay has an innate plus projectile speed, and that actually makes it harder to turn the rockets. So the rocket turn speed upgrade helps with that, and then of course going around corners as well. So for instance, I don't know if I can get all 4 stacks up, just due to the reload time of it, but if you do have the boost active, yeah, you're dealing 1,000. If you're hitting anything soft, thousands of damage per rocket from relative safety, having radars to see if anybody approaches you, and then being able to jet away fairly quickly if needed. So it worked out a lot better than I'd actually anticipated, even though, again, having a Griffin, or even having just a buddy also running that prior build, another tow with a Griffin, would make it a lot easier, not, you know, necessitating so much hardware being spent on just the like survivability, and then you could focus more on damage, because again, you could also do something like stack a Jackie on this. So I don't know what the future of these builds is going to be, since it's sort of up in the air what they're going to do with Uranium, and I don't really need to run these in regular PvP because I already have all their trials completed. But like, I did get a few good clips, a few good clutches even in Uranium with some of these. So again, if and when I actually compile a video for that, might be able to actually show the efficacy rather than just talking about them in Garage. But they did work well enough for me to kind of hold on to and see if there's anything, you know, in the next, I don't know, 2 or 3 months that they do event-wise that would, like, allow me to use them some more. Otherwise, it's the sort of thing where, like, the only trials I have left to complete are relic weapons, so I'd probably just be running those. And then just running my, you know, all reliable in Uranium, which is how I got up to Legend again, or like just not participating in Uranium, like the 1-2 rotation, /rotation, something like that. Because the Yangwang cockpit build does fine for me. Like, I mean, it gets me up into Legend every time I use it. You know, even with the nerfs they're doing, they don't affect the build because I'm not using them in the, like, the copy-paste, super popular meta way. So whatever nerfs they throw at it, other than their continued attempts at getting the inertia removed from the projectiles, which would just cause me to shoot myself whenever I'm boosting around, would essentially just let me stay with this. So did also play around with the Morta. Very big power score issues. Again, lack of radar. Lack of radar meant basically guaranteed Ls. Also didn't quite have the weapon durability to outlive the Arbiters especially, and also Raijins. I could deal with the Yangwangs decently, especially because of the speed difference, but Normally it wasn't just fighting 4 Yongwangs without radar or cloak. So not very versatile. Again, just leans really hard into the dealing a fuck ton of damage per shot and hopefully crippling them in one go, which again, it did do. And a couple of clanmates got a copy of this to try and tweak for their own purposes, see if it works for them, but again, not really any joy for me. Still have this, which is a adaptation of a clanmates build who I don't even remember if they got it back and I've actually used it or if they're just sticking with their old version, but it wasn't in use for the event at all, at least not personally. And then we have this one in my garage slot, which is essentially an experimental one. I didn't end up getting it done before the end of Uranium. I like the premise of running 2 Scotties and a flash, because in theory you are quartering the enemy's damage, dealing damage to them, and then because of the flash's perk also reducing the cooling speed and reload speed of enemies, essentially gimping them even further to something like 1/8-ish, 1/5-ish of their damage, somewhere around there, between 1/5 and 1/8 of their of their DPS, and then having the beacon cabin getting even more damage resistance as a result of that. But that specific setup with the flash is like basically has to be 12 to 13k. You're not going to get that in 10k at all. This is essentially a variant specifically for the 10k uranium for, the Yongwangs especially, because I can still run the Spark to blow up all their shots. I can run the Scotty to reduce any damage I take from any of the other builds, namely Raijins and Planks, and in theory actually be, decently tanky, especially with the upcoming Grizzly co-driver changes again, where I don't have to have the cabin in front. But like I said, didn't end up really using this at all. Just a thought I had where if I did, instead of throwing modules underneath, which I know is the popular choice even for me, but have the weapons shoot around the cabin due to, again, the Grizzly co-driver currently requiring the cabin to be hit directly, allowing you to maybe potentially work somewhat. The best firing angles I've found are as like in this current setup, but even that's somewhat difficult because of course the Spark has a lot of the build to shoot through in order to hit anything at the front. So I did play around with some different positions, like having all of the stuff on the back here lifted up 1 pip so the Scotty could shoot down easier, but had issues with the Spark being able to shoot at all. I played around with the idea of using it on hovers, but then the lack of stability of it caused it to tilt and block the firing angles of both the Scotty and the Spark, and also inflated the power score significantly. You could theoretically try it with Atom's small tracks, seemed like they were also a pretty decent alternative, but again, being able to use camera steering to actually keep the Spark in a more or less able to shoot angle, I found was pretty important. And again, I didn't end up finishing it for the event. In any case, it is currently using the Omamori with the concept of this is meant to be an attrition build where I keep the weapons on to continue debuffing. Losing them is a pretty big setback to that, so having the Omamori attached just to the weapons should help out in that front. But again, I didn't end up finishing it. You can't really do this in a way that uses the averter on all of the weapons. You can maybe get it on a cab and 2 weapons, or a cab and 1 weapon, but it wasn't really super satisfying result-wise. And so, like, this isn't necessarily the finished what it would look like, but just the skeleton of the, the hardware, the energy, and then in theory being able to throw armor on and actually test it out. But didn't get to that, and then we were up in like gold and legend already, so it's like trying to mess around with this in up there is really not the play. So at least I now have slots to save it. How exciting. Probably have to juggle around a few of these, decide which variants, if any, I'm keeping. I will note for this is the 9k variant I did again for us running clan cons this week. So with the 10k variant, I swapped to the mass limit cockpit, I believe, that I got from the cabin fusion event, since the cockpit like fucking never shows up in the other pre-made crafting events. And then I ran the Thor or bootstrap, And then the Chameleon or upgrading the fin wheel to the Cyclops, played around with both of those ideas. Basically settled on the Chameleon one just for the ability to sneak up on hovers especially. But either of them worked, and then of course I just tiered it back down to the gas gen and the fin whale and no cloak, and thus no Phobos, which is also kind of an L since Phobos gets that boost to the invisibility, but I don't have invisibility. Gives the boost to speed. I could use the speed, but you know, is what it is. So the plus side, if I do get another upgrade, because I decided power was also pretty good for the cockpit when I didn't need the mass, so I kind of need to re-upgrade this for the cabin speed upgrade as well. But with swapping to a bootstrap, I could swap to my mass limit, which happens to also have plus speed cockpit, and then Phobos, and that got me up to the speed cap. Well, 119, so effectively the speed cap. But you know, with no cloak, no reason to have Phobos. So I think that's pretty much everything. I still need to stick up the factory strider and throw that up on exhibition. Been procrastinating on that for a while too, but like I said, a lot of these are going to need like tweaks because they're from, you know, prior updates and haven't been re-uploaded, although again, not a huge deal if I'm not using them specifically in PvP, or are so old that like I literally didn't have an update number applied to them, so who knows how out of date they are. Luckily, a lot of the changes that broke a lot of these builds also unbroke them later on. So for instance, the energy changes broke quite a few, and the changes to augers broke quite a few, but then they've also essentially undone some of the auger changes. So while this build was over mass and is still under energy, it ended up getting tweaked again and is now back to not being over mass, despite me not touching it in like a year and a half, 2 years. So yeah, the other build I was referring to here, this is a variant of the bombing build again before I went with the sort of Wraith hover setup. So I tweaked this to essentially be like a ground version of the A10 Thunderbolt in a sense. So that's why I went with the name change, because it's not really Thunderbolt, because it's not, you know, vehicle for the sky. As you can tell, significantly higher power score. That's running the Jackie, the Devourer, Yeti, and a Cyclops. So again, wouldn't be bringing this into Uranium, but messed around with it a little bit in Next Step, especially because I like the idea of, you know, essentially being a ground-based A10 Thunderbolt. So I will note that the boosters are actually facing the wrong way on this. Reason being that IRL, the A10 Thunderbolt's GAU8 Avenger is such force with its being a Gatling gun with like 4,000 RPM that it actually slows the vehicle down, and that doesn't currently do that on my build. Because again, this doesn't have an absurd amount of recoil, but I can sort of mimic that by using boosters backwards, and I'm already able to go so fast, and with the buggy wheels boosting it, that me boosting backwards actually lets me keep the perk active and doesn't slow me down. So I can use both to actually slow down slightly, still get the perk active, and then have enough time to get the entire burst off. Whereas if I had the boosters especially facing forward, I'd jet past most of the targets before the burst is done. So yeah, more of a for fun build that I just upload because I'm not actively using it, but if other people, you know, again, get inspired from it or have fun with it or whatever, then so be it. I don't really have any long-term plans to like keep it or iterate on it or use it, but you know, it is there. So until such time as I delete a bunch more things to make slots for more new builds, it is an option. So yeah, got a whole lot more updates on a lot of these to make, but sort of the current state of things, and I'll probably delete a couple more of these builds now that the update's over. Again, if and when I end up needing more slots for new builds. So